Hi, this is Brother Peter Diamond of MostHolyFamilyMonastery.com. The title of this talk is, The Bible Teaches Confession to a Priest. For the most part, I will be using the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, a famous Protestant translation. Many non-Catholics say that confession to a priest is not taught in the Bible. They say that to be forgiven of even mortal sins, all one needs to do is to believe in Jesus, or at the most, to confess those sins directly to God. But this position, which holds that confession to a priest is not necessary for forgiveness of mortal sins after baptism, contradicts what is taught in the Bible. First, in the Old Testament, if one committed a sin, he couldn't just confess the sin to God and be done with the matter. No, he had to go to the priest. This is taught throughout the book of Leviticus, which is the third book in the Old Testament. Here is one good example of this. Leviticus 5:1-10, quote, "And if a soul sin, when he shall be guilty in one of these things, he shall confess that he hath sinned in that thing, and he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord for his sin which he hath sinned, and he shall bring them unto the priest, who shall offer that which is for the sin offering first, and the priest shall make an atonement for him for his sin which he hath sinned, and it shall be forgiven him." End quote. In this passage we see that the priest's role was indispensable for the forgiveness of sin. This is taught throughout Leviticus and the other foundational books of the Old Testament. Here's another example. Leviticus 19:21-22, quote, "And he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord, unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, even a ram for a trespass offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before the Lord for his sin which he hath done, and the sin which he hath done shall be forgiven him." End quote. Not only did one have to go to the priest to be forgiven of sins, as these and other passages make clear, but also to become clean. Jesus makes reference to this in Luke 5:13-14. In the Old Testament, people would become unclean after having done certain things which God said made a person unclean. To become clean, the priest would have to be involved. Leviticus 12:6-8, quote, "And when the days of her purifying are fulfilled, if she be not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtles or 2 young pigeons, and the priest shall make an atonement for her, and she shall be clean." End quote. Leviticus 13:27, quote, "And the priest shall look upon him the 7th day, and if it be spread much abroad in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of leprosy." End quote. Leviticus 14:11-19-20, quote, "And the priest that maketh him clean shall present the man that is to be made clean, and the priest shall offer the sin offering, and make an atonement for him that is to be cleansed from his uncleanness. And afterward he shall kill the burnt offering. And the priest shall offer the burnt offering and the meat offering upon the altar, and the priest shall make an atonement for him, and he shall be clean." End quote. Leviticus 14:31, quote, "And the priest shall make an atonement for him that is to be cleansed before the Lord." End quote. Now some might say, that was in the Old Testament. What about in the New Testament, after Jesus has come? In just a few minutes I will show that the New Testament also teaches confession to a priest, but these points from the Old Testament demonstrate how God works, and how he has worked throughout salvation history. God had priests. God set up a priesthood. God forgives and reconciles people through priests. People had to go to the priest to be forgiven. In Numbers 3, we see a reference to a distinct line of priests, who alone are able to handle this special ministry. Numbers 3:10, quote, "And thou shalt appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall wait on their priest's office." End quote. Numbers 3:3 also says that priests' hands were consecrated, but that has been removed from the Protestant Bible. In Numbers 5:6-7 we see a specific reference to the necessity of confession of sins. Quote, "When a man or woman shall commit any sin that men commit, to do a trespass against the Lord, and that person be guilty, then they shall confess their sin which they have done." End quote. The rest of the chapter contains instructions which involve priests at every turn. For example, Numbers 5:14-16, quote, "If the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be not defiled, then the man bring his wife unto the priest, and he shall bring her offering for her, and the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord." End quote. So in Numbers 5, we see a clear example of confession as well as the intercession of priests. In Numbers 6:11, in the very next chapter, we see that if a man becomes defiled by a certain action, quote, "the priest shall offer the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, and make an atonement for him." End quote. In Numbers 15, we again see that sins are forgiven through the priest. Numbers 15:22-25, quote, "And if ye have erred, and not observed all these commandments, which the Lord hath spoken unto Moses, all the congregation shall offer one young bullock for a burnt offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for all the congregation of the children of Israel, and it shall be forgiven them." End quote. This is also repeated in Numbers 15:28. In Exodus 28:1-3, we read about the office of priests, and that priests wear special garments. Quote, "And take thou unto thee Aaron thy brother and his sons with him, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. And thou shalt make holy garments for Aaron, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office." End quote. We read about this in Leviticus 16:32-34 as well. Quote, "And the priest whom he shall anoint shall make the atonement, and shall put on the linen clothes, even the holy garments." End quote. In Leviticus 23:4 we read about special feast days, or holy days of obligation, which were to be observed. Leviticus 23:4, quote, "These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons." End quote. In Deuteronomy 24:8 and 17:9, we also read about the necessity to follow the instructions of the priests. In Deuteronomy 26:1-5, we read about offering the first fruits through the priest. There is no doubt that God established it so that men were reconciled, forgiven, and made clean through the ministry of priests. That was how God worked in the old law. What about in the new? In Matthew 5:17-18, Jesus said, quote, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am come not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto thee, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." End quote. Jesus came not to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. There is no doubt that the new law surpasses the old. It surpasses it so much that it makes it obsolete. Jesus accomplished all the figures and prophecies in the old, and made it perfect, rendering the old thereby void. But the new law has similarities to the old law, being its fulfillment. For example, in the Old Testament there were 12 tribes with 12 tribal leaders, and Moses had 70 elders. Likewise, in the New Testament, Jesus has 12 apostles and 70 other disciples. Another example would be how Jesus inherits the throne of David, as we read in Luke 1:32 and Acts 2:30. Jesus and his spiritual kingdom, which is his church, fulfill what was prefigured in the earthly kingdom of the Davidic monarchy. Another example would be how in the Old Testament a father passed his blessing on to his son through the laying on of hands. In Deuteronomy 34:9 we see that spiritual authority is passed down from Moses to Joshua through the laying on of hands. Likewise, in the New Testament, priests were ordained through the laying on of hands, as we read in 2 Timothy 1:6. So the point is that while Jesus' kingdom and new law surpass and make void the old, the new law nevertheless fulfills it, perfects it, and corresponds to the old law in many ways. So just as there was definitely a priesthood in the Old Testament, there is a priesthood in the New Testament. The apostles were made priests and bishops by Jesus Christ. And just as the priests were involved in the process of the covering or forgiveness of sins in the Old Testament, Jesus gave priests the power to forgive sins in the New. We read this clearly in John chapter 20. John 20:21-23, quote,